So let's go ahead and get started with our political town hall. I want to introduce one of the first journalists that will join me, Abby Phillips. Abby is a political reporter covering the presidential race. There she is. Abby, welcome. Good to see you. Go ahead right there. I'll take that. Abby is specifically following the Democratic nominee Hillary Clinton on the campaign trail. She was a frequent guest on TV, radio, and others and outlets, including MSNBC, CNN, Fox News, and so on. Our next guest is Jose Del Real. Jose, are you there? All right, come on out. Thank you. Jose is the reporter covering the 2016 race. Specifically, he's on the Trump campaign trail. Thank you, Jose, for being here. He's got a busy week. Our next guest is Elise Vibeck. Elise, come on out. Thank you, Elise. Elise is the political reporter on the Washington Post Power Post team covering Congress, the 26th election, tech policy, and more. You got a lot.
Yes.
Absolutely. Well, let's do another round. Thank you, everybody, for being here. All right, so you have all been sort of the go-to reporters for the Post, the Washington Post. How has it been, Abby?
Busy? It's been busy. It's been a really incredible cycle. I was just talking to another reporter who had covered 10 presidential cycles, and she was like, I've never seen anything like it. This is my first presidential, time on the campaign trail. And it's as thrilling for us as it is for you guys. I'm sure watching it from afar, we have never seen anything like it before, and I think we're all just trying to do the best that we can.
How's that?
Yeah, I think that's right. There was once upon a time that we believed this was going to be the Hillary Clinton, Jeb Bush campaign, that we were going to have a summer of policy and then, a very sort of stale set of primaries. None of us expected it to be as crazy as it's been, but we just get up each day and get to work.
Yeah, we're lucky to be at the Post too. It's such a great team, not only of journalists, but of people. When you're in the trenches in a campaign like this, you want the personalities around you to be, tolerable at worst, right? But Posties are great, and I think all three of us feel lucky to work there. Yeah.
So all of you have been on the campaign trail. For a lot of us, we only read the words that you present to us. What's daily life like on the campaign trail? Abby?
Oh, it's a lot of buses and airplanes and coffee. I mean, it's actually for us day to day. I feel like it's not very interesting for me to describe what my life is like because so often we just wake up in hotel rooms in places that most of the time I can't even really remember. In
a good way.
Yeah, I wish I could spend more time in some of these places, but I've covered Hillary Clinton for the last 7 months, and I think we'll talk probably a little bit more about this. Clinton and Trump probably could not be more different candidates. And while my life is actually quite predictable, generally speaking, on a day-to-day basis, I know what she's going to say. I've heard the speech more than a few times, and so it's very different covering a candidate who doesn't actually interact with us as the media very often. She doesn't often go off script, so we hear the same message from her day to day. She's very consistent, and I'm sure Jose can talk a little bit about what it's like covering Trump, but it's not anything like that. So.
Go ahead, let's talk about it. What's it like?
It's a lot like what Abby's describing, actually. I talk to my friends about it, and they say, what does your day look like? It's really not as glamorous as I think it's sometimes portrayed as being. Like your morning starts with you looking over wistfully at your running shoes and saying, not this morning, maybe tomorrow. But you never give up hope. You always pack the running shoes. You never use them though.
Point of inspiration, maybe just a little bit.
And you wake up, you sort of see, with Trump specifically, you have to check to see if he's tweeted anything overnight. And I knew I was really in this thing when I turned on Twitter notifications for Trump, so now the moment that he tweets, it pops up on my phone like a text message. So it's a lot of just chasing the latest thing that he's said. via Twitter, on telephone interviews, on television interviews. And then also balancing, reacting to whatever it is that he has just said in public with, more enterprising pieces, really digging into the movement, really sort of exploring what this whole thing means.
Elise, talk about today digital versus traditional print and what you have to go through. I mean, you're, like we were just talking about Twitter, you're always on and you need to respond or at least let your readers know. I mean, how do you balance this?
I think it's interesting as a millennial to be navigating this because obviously digital kind of runs through our blood, right? But we're also concerned about things like work-life balance. So for a long time, I didn't have those Twitter notifications on my phone as a kind of statement. I'm not doing that. I'm not in the middle of dinner going to be looking over at my phone. But we do live in a 24-hour news cycle. You have to be updated when you're covering politics for a place like the Post. So I would say that I work on a newsletter. It's one of my duties on PowerPost, which is one of our verticals at the Post. It's called the Daily 202. I would definitely encourage people to sign up for it. It's a morning tip sheet. And as someone who works on the front end of it, most of it is produced between 8 p.m. and 6 a.m. I get to bed, around midnight, 1 a.m. after, again, studying those Twitter feeds, making sure everything we have is updated. It really is a job that takes up every moment of your day. You get used to working at all hours, as these guys do. So I think that is the move to digital, but on the advantage side for readers, you get that news pretty much anytime you want it. One of us will be there writing it for you.
All right, so we have to talk about it. The Trump situation. What's going on there? Because everybody here wants me to ask you about this. So they want me to ask you, was Jose involved in the Trump banning the Post, and how does he cover it now? That's an awkward. I said we were going to filter, so.
We have approached covering this campaign the way that we would approach covering any campaign, which is to say we have covered him and the campaign apparatus fairly, aggressively, and thoroughly. Ban or no ban, we're going to continue to do that. The reality is that Donald Trump is a very unconventional candidate. It's not a surprise. But as a result, we've sort of developed this panoptic style. We make sure that we are seeing all his tweets. We know when he's going to go on television. We know where he is. We are closely following the news cycles. And after spending 6 months following him around, you can sort of actually begin to predict how he's going to respond to things. One of the most important tasks that I think we have as reporters at the Post specifically is not just to sort of hash out what Donald Trump has said or what Hillary Clinton has said, but to contextualize it properly, to speak to voters on the ground, to explain what this movement is. So with someone like Trump, the most interesting stories aren't even about what he's saying. It's about the way that people are reacting to it, the way that the party is reacting to it. And ban or no ban, that hasn't gone away.
Yeah. One of the top questions, to Elise, for you is millennials have grown up using interactive environments. How do you get them to engage in the news rather than just read it?
Oh, that's interesting. Well, obviously, events like this have, real-time responses where you guys are able to give us questions through the digital means. I think that is one great example. We see that on the campaign trail increasingly. I also cover Congress, and they do more and more of that as well. Virtually every office in Washington, D.C. is trying to find ways to connect with millennials, usually using social media. Sometimes their efforts are pretty ham-handed. Some of them are getting better. We're actually going to hear from a White House official who helps run their Instagram, and they've been very successful at that. As journalists, we have a certain critique of that because sometimes as officials, public officials, elected officials get more creative in how they present their agendas and themselves to the public using these direct-to-voter means, they're able to exclude us. And of course, we think that our role in holding them accountable, explaining things that they don't necessarily want to reveal about themselves is very important. So as you know, our world is revolutionized along digital lines, as we all feel like we have access to, you know, the backstage of a Hillary Clinton rally or Donald Trump's every waking thought on Twitter, that's great. But in many ways, you are following along, and then we hope that millennial readers will then come to us in order to get that context and to be educated about the things that those politicians really don't want you to know.
Yeah. Well, Abby, this is one of the top questions, too. Does the media have an ethical responsibility to hold candidates like Hillary Clinton accountable? Yeah. Or is the perception of neutrality more important?
No, I mean, I think, first of all, they're not mutually exclusive. But yeah, we certainly think that accountability is part of the package with journalism. Right. It isn't just us sitting in the room and listening to what they say and transcribing it and presenting it on our website for you. It's also about asking questions that they wouldn't otherwise be asked. It's about digging through documents and finding information that isn't necessarily publicly available. So I think accountability is key, but you know, I mean, I think fairness is also just as important because I mean, I think in this day and age, there's actually a wider range of ideological news organizations that exist. The Washington Post is not an ideological news organization on the editorial side or on the newsroom side. And so it's our responsibility to be fair and impartial and to not be partisan. And we take that responsibility really seriously because it's part of the long tradition of sort of holding up both sides of a debate to scrutiny. And it's more difficult to do that if you have declared allegiances. Although I guess I'll say again, there are plenty of news organizations these days that have upfront allegiances, and people consume that news, and I think that's fine, but the Washington Post isn't one of those.
All right, so this is for you, Jose. Are you ready? Why did Trump fire his campaign manager?
Well, you can read all about it at thewashingtonpost.com.
Front page, there you go.
You know, this is the interesting thing about the Trump campaign. And I'm actually the sort of political reporter that doesn't find the day-to-day operational stuff of a campaign to be particularly riveting. But with Trump, there is the sense that they were sort of building it as they went, and they were adapting to situations as they were presented to them. You know, there aren't many political strategists who believed that Donald Trump would be the Republican nominee. Most didn't think that he would make it to the beginning of primary season, to be completely honest. And you could sort of see that reflected in the way that his campaign was structured from the beginning. It was a very small sort of apparatus. The problem that came up for the campaign and for Corey Lewandowski, the now former campaign manager, is that once you get into a general election, it is a completely different ballpark. It's no longer just about exciting voters with a message. It's about building the on-the-ground operational infrastructure that is going to get voters to turn up in November. That is not a small endeavor. It is incredibly complicated, and it takes a sophisticated operation. So I think Corey was having a difficult time playing nice with the Republican National Committee, and he also sort of represented a different stage of the campaign. So that's why Donald Trump made the decision that he made. And you can read more about it on the website.
That's a good plug. Elise, how do you balance personal interest in the election with your journalistic practices?
Personal interest in the election in terms of what I want to see
where
covered?
You, yeah,
sure. I think that one of the nice things about being a younger journalist in a newsroom that is so flexible is you can pursue stories that are of interest to you unless, again, you are on the campaign trail and you are kind of tied to their hip for 24/7. But the Washington Post really encourages us to follow our own lines of inquiry. For me, obviously, looking at the digital revolution and how it relates to politics has been a big interest of mine. Right now, I'm leading a team at the Washington Post, along with my coworker who couldn't be here, on Women in Washington. It's a huge 6-month investigative project about the evolution of women's power tied to the potential for our first female president. And that has been a really interesting experience for me. I've only been at the Post a year, and to be able to lead a project as a young journalist in a very veteran newsroom is one thing that really impressed me about the Post. They're very willing to kind of invest in you and your ideas. And the other thing about working in such a talented newsroom is we have departments across the company that are willing to come together to help support the journalism. In fact, most of our newsroom, even if people aren't writing, they are trained as journalists, and they're very, very, very good. So when it comes to video or graphics or photo or events or promotional press and that kind of thing, all of these people at the Post are able to come together to support your vision, which is really a cool way of being able to explore a topic, because once you get all those people together in a room, you're able to see things from angles that you might not have seen before.
Is there something on the Hillary campaign that you'd love to cover that you just haven't yet?
There are probably a lot of things. I mean, I was going to say in response to the question that was presented to Elise that, even as trail reporters, we often have to find our way into stories in different ways and using our personal interests to get to a place where, where we are bringing something unique to it. I think one of the interesting ongoing narratives about Hillary Clinton is the extent to which she is going to have to become her own person and is in the process of becoming her own person. She's running as a candidate who's trying to basically recreate the vision of her husband's presidency in the 1990s and extend the vision of Barack Obama's presidency of the last 8 years. And somewhere in there is a person who is their own, who wants to be their own president and will have their own legacy. And I think it's an ongoing question of who and what she wants that to be. And even how she would articulate it herself, because so much of her pitch so far has been kind of sandwiched between these two presidencies, the last two Democratic presidencies that this country has seen. So we'll be talking, I'm sure, a lot about that in the next few months.
Jose, this is for you. Many millennials distrust corporate news outlets like the Post. This is from our social Q&A. How often in the news you report is filtered by executives?
It's not. That's a simple answer. It's not. We're an independent newsroom. The editorial decisions and the coverage decisions that we make are part of a conversation and a dialogue between editors and reporters. That's sort of the extent of it.
Yeah, the only people who have their hands on our news are journalists.
Yeah.
They're all journalists, top to bottom. If they're going to be affecting a news story, they're a journalist.
It's just also a really large newsroom.
How many?
It's, what is it, over 500 editorial reporting and editing. That's a lot of people. I would be, you would be hard.
A lot of articles to review.
Yeah, I mean, and we publish some 1,500 articles a day. It's an incredible volume of content, and if you meet an executive who has time to deal with the nitty-gritty of that stuff, I would be really interested in who that person is. But there's just no time. It's a well-oiled machine.
I suspect part of the digital, what we were talking earlier, is digital getting it out as soon as possible too, right?
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
The newsroom is designed to make sure that when something happens, we get it to you and your eyeballs in whatever social channel you prefer, across platforms, across devices, in video, in graphics, in writing, on our Twitter feeds as quickly as possible. I mean, it's really amazing how that process can be broken down into all of these individual jobs where you just hand off the content and hand off the content. And like I said, all of those people are trained as journalists.
It's certainly true that there is definitely a financial and corporate interest in making these platforms, creating these platforms so that readers have easy access to our journalism. But that's not what we're concerned about. I just want as many people as possible to read my work and the Post's work. And that's how we make those decisions.
Jose, a question, one of the top ones. Do you think the mainstream media is responsible for Trump's rise?
There are, I think, a lot of really fair questions to ask about the amount of coverage that he got early in this election cycle, particularly on television news. But the reality is that we're not voting for, we're not casting ballots on behalf of the voters. The voters get to vet this information themselves and decide how they're going to vote. They are agents in this process as well. So the Post specifically has tried to, like I said, cover Trump and Clinton and all the other candidates comprehensively, and after that point, it's really up to the voters to decide who they support and who they can get behind.
Yeah. How has it been on the Clinton campaign with the Hillary and Bernie? Because obviously we're getting some questions as well that are coming in. I mean, is there a lot of discussions around the Clinton versus Bernie scenario?
Well, you know, Bernie is still a factor in this race, and he will be at least until the Democratic convention and probably afterwards. There's no question that he really changed the Democratic race in a way that no one expected. He revealed weaknesses in the front runner in Hillary Clinton's candidacy virtually from the very beginning, and also unlocked something in the Democratic electorate that I think many people didn't realize was as powerful as it was. And so you have all of these things happening, and yet still Hillary Clinton emerged as the likely nominee. But as we go forward, we're going to be dealing with how the Clinton campaign is going to be trying to bring Bernie Sanders' supporters into the fold, and also the ways in which he has changed her as a candidate. And I get, you know, as a reporter, I get a lot of questions and angry emails from Sanders supporters about our coverage of him. And, you know, I think it comes with the territory. I mean, we have had a full-time reporter on Bernie Sanders almost since the very beginning, and have been covering him virtually every day. We get a lot of complaints about the Democratic Party's process for choosing a nominee, which ultimately we have no control over, but we just sort of, we have to report it as it is, and you know, you can like superdelegates or not like them. They're part of the process right now, and that's what we're reporting on. And I'm sure some of the questions that you got were about superdelegates, and
there's some interesting ones.
But you know, it's part of the process. I mean, I think Bernie has gotten a lot more coverage than even his supporters think he has. And the results have shown in the fact that he got all the way to the very end and got very close. But.
Yeah. Elise, what about millennial voters? Do you think that everything that you guys are covering is something they're interested in? I mean, do you hear from millennials like, why don't you cover more of this?
Yeah, sometimes. I think that institutions like the Post probably have a bias toward a more traditional way of breaking down beats. So in journalism, we organize our teams based on certain topics, and I know that given this presidential cycle and the number of candidates, we sort of had to rethink that. People who were covering one candidate suddenly turned around and covered another candidate. So I think that just the newsroom of the future is a place with a lot more natural flexibility. And I think that millennial voters and readers will come to appreciate that. And I think as journalists, we hope more and more that readers will understand us as reporters and writers and appreciate not necessarily the perspective, because that might seem like I'm talking about opinion, but the approach that we as individuals take. And I know that many journalists, and probably the three of us, aren't planning on covering these particular issues for the rest of our careers. So hopefully people who come to appreciate our reporting on one topic will be able to recognize us and appreciate that reporting as we move forward as well.
Great. All right, so some vice president questions. Will Trump choose Christie?
I don't know what Trump is going to do this afternoon. So.
And you got to, and he's like, Derek, I really got to leave after this.
My guess would be probably not Chris Christie. He's already on his side. Doesn't need him.
Hillary. What about Hillary? VP choice?
Your guess is probably as good as mine. I mean, I think she could be Elizabeth Warren. It could be someone else. Yeah, your guess
That would be
is
unlikely.
as good as mine. Yeah.
All right, best thing about doing this job. Abby, you're first.
I love being out of the office and meeting real people. It's a lesser known part of being on the campaign trail, but it's the best part for me.
Jose?
Yeah, just talking to voters. I think with the Trump movement, we sort of missed it at the beginning, and unpacking what it means and who is part of the movement and who's being left behind by the movement is really, really fascinating and personally quite rewarding.
Elise?
You get to be on the internet all day and no one can say anything about it. No, I like the writing part and I like the research. When you work on longer term projects, you're able to delve into documents and series of interviews that you can't on a daily beat. And the ability to explore those topics on a deeper level is a lot of fun.
Great.
Privilege.
Thank you. Let's give him a round of applause. Thank you.